In 1985, 5 men slipped into a private suite at New York's Plaza Hotel. No cameras, no press, no witnesses. Behind closed doors, they plotted to quietly rewrite the rules of the global economy. They weren't generals or kings. They were finance ministers and central bankers. Yet their weapons weren't tanks or missiles. They were numbers, exchange rates, interest rates, balance sheets. And the war they were about to wage would shake every major economy on Earth. For months, the US dollar had grown too powerful, strangling American exports and destabilizing global trade. So on that September night, the world's richest nations conspired to bring it down. They called it the Plaza Accord. One document, a few signatures, and within days, the dollar fell like a wounded empire. Fortunes were made, economies were broken, power shifted. But here's what they never told you. That meeting wasn't the beginning of a story. It was a continuation of one. A story that began centuries earlier, when empires first realized they could control nations without ever firing a shot. All they had to do was control the money. Because money in the hands of a powerful few is not a tool, it's a weapon. A weapon that can inflate, deflate, enrich, or impoverish entire populations. A weapon that determines who rises and who falls. And while the world watched armies and borders, the real battles were being fought in the invisible arena of exchange rates and interest policies. From London Mayes gold vaults in the 1800s to the smoke-filled meeting rooms of Washington and Tokyo in the 1980s, the war for monetary dominance has never truly stopped. It only changed shape. And in our time of digital money, sanctions and debt, the front lines have gone underground. Every time a government prints money to stimulate growth, a currency war flickers to life. Every time a central bank raises or cuts rates, another skirmish begins. And every time you see your savings lose value, quietly, invisibly, that's collateral damage. Because this war doesn't need soldiers, it needs economists. It doesn't occupy land, it occupies balance sheets. And its casualties don't wear uniforms, they hold paychecks. But what if I told you this war never ended? That while you're watching markets rise and fall, entire nations are still secretly manipulating currencies, battling for trade dominance and fighting for control of the world's financial order? What if I told you the currency wars never stopped? They just went underground. Welcome to the Financial Historians, and when money, history, and power collide, here we uncover the stories hidden between the lines of economic charts, the battles that shaped empires, collapsed nations, and quietly redrew the world map. Because behind every great war, every revolution, and every empire, there's one invisible force that decides who wins and who loses: currency. For centuries, nations have fought not just for land or resources, but for control over the value of money itself. It's the silent war beneath the headlines, waged in meeting rooms instead of battlefields, where a decimal point can do more damage than a missile. Long before Wall Street existed, rulers understood that money was power in its purest form. When Rome's silver coins lost their purity, the empire's strength began to fade. When Britain tied its wealth to gold, it built a global empire on the stability of a single metal. And when that same gold standard shattered in the chaos of the 20th century, a new kind of warfare began. One fought with inflation, interest rates, and currency manipulation. This isn't conspiracy, it's history. History written not in ink, but in exchange rates. In the 1930s, as the Great Depression gripped the world, nations devalued their currencies to survive, each trying to make their exports cheaper, their debts lighter, their economies stronger. It was a desperate game of economic tug-of-war, one that deepened global chaos and set the stage for political extremism. Fast forward a few decades, and the same strategies returned, polished, institutionalized, hidden behind the language of monetary policy. The players changed, ministers became central bankers, treaties became trade deals, and manipulation became market intervention. But the purpose stayed the same: gain power by controlling the value of money. And make no mistake, the struggle continues today. When one nation lowers its interest rates, another retaliates. When one prints money to boost exports, another raises tariffs in defense. Each move triggers another, a chain reaction of invisible attacks and counterattacks that ripple through global markets and into your wallet. Because this isn't just about governments and billionaires, it's about you. Every inflation spike, every rising cost of living, every shrinking paycheck, they're not random. They're the echoes of these unseen wars, the side effects of decisions made in rooms you'll never enter. And the deeper you look, the more you'll see that every empire, from Rome to Washington, from London to Beijing, has fought the same battle, the fight to control money, and through it, the world. So today we're pulling back the curtain. We're retracing the evolution of these secret wars for us from gold coins to digital currencies, and revealing how nations still use money as their most powerful weapon. Because once you understand currency wars, you'll never see economics the same way again. Act 1. The birth of currency wars. Every empire learns the same lesson. If you can control the value of money, you can control the destiny of nations. And that's where our story begins. In the age of gold and gunpowder, in the 18th and 19th centuries, gold wasn't just a metal, it was power incarnate. Britain ruled the seas, but its real empire was financial. The British pound, backed by gold and trust, became the world's reserve currency long before anyone used that term. Other nations, France, Germany, even the United States, followed the same rule. If your money could be converted to gold, your word meant something in global trade. But there was a hidden tension beneath that golden surface. If your nation ran out of gold, your economy collapsed, so governments learned to cheat. Quietly, they debased their coins, diluted their reserves, or printed more notes than they could back. France did it. So did the early American Republic. Every time they did, inflation rose, savings vanished, and the poor paid the price. It was economic warfare in slow motion, a race to make money cheaper, to gain trade advantage at someone else's expense. And by the 1930s, that race turned into an open battlefield. The Great Depression wasn't just a financial crisis, it was a currency war. Countries abandoned the gold standard, slashed the value of their currencies, and tried to export their way to recovery. The US dollar, the British pound, the French franc, all deliberately weakened to help domestic industries survive. Each nation hoped devaluation would make its goods cheaper abroad. But when everyone plays the same trick, no one wins. Prices fell, trade collapsed, global trust evaporated. That's when economists first coined the phrase, beggar thy neighbor, a brutal description of how nations, in saving themselves, slowly strangled each other. And though the world eventually stabilized after World War II, the pattern was set. Money itself had become a weapon, and governments had learned how to wield it. Act 2, the modern era. By the 1980s, the war had gone high-tech. The new battleground wasn't gold or silver. It was policy. And the generals wore suits. After decades of American dominance, the US dollar had grown too strong. Exports were suffering, manufacturing was in decline, and the trade deficit was ballooning. Japan and West Germany were thriving, thanks to undervalued currencies and booming exports. The balance of power was shifting. Quietly, dangerously. So on September 22nd, 1985, finance ministers and central bankers from the US, Japan, Germany, France, and the UK gathered at the Plaza Hotel in New York. Their goal, to bring the dollar down, deliberately. No public debate, no vote, just a secret agreement. The Plaza Accord. Within months, the dollar plummeted by over 30%. The plan worked for some. American exports rebounded, but Japan's economy overheated. Cheap money flooded Tokyo, fueling one of the greatest asset bubbles in history. Skyscrapers, stocks and land soaring to impossible prices. When it all crashed in the early 1990s, Japan entered what became known as the Lost Decade, a generation of stagnation caused by a single 90S decision in New York. But the game didn't end there. Other nations watched, learned, and adapted. China, rising fast in the 1990s and 2000s, played its own version of the currency war. By keeping the yuan artificially low, China made its exports unbeatable. Factories multiplied, jobs shifted overseas, and Western consumers got cheaper goods. But at a cost. America's manufacturing heartland hollowed out, debt soared, inequality widened, yet few called it war, because this wasn't fought with bombs. It was fought with bonds. And the weapon was simple. Control your exchange rate and you control global trade. Meanwhile, central banks discovered a new superweapon. Monetary policy. When crises hit, they printed money. When growth lagged, they cut interest rates. Each intervention made one nation stronger and another weaker. The more one country inflated, the more another had to defend its currency. The result? A perpetual arms race of printing, borrowing, and manipulating that defined the global economy for decades. By the early 2000s, the battlefield was everywhere, from Wall Street to Shanghai. Every interest rate cut sent shockwaves across continents. Every trade deal hit a currency agenda, and every central banker became both policymaker and soldier in this hidden war for financial dominance. Act 3. The new front lines. Today, the battlefield looks nothing like it once did, but the war rages on. Only now the weapons have evolved. Central banks still call the shots, but their tools have become more extreme. Zero interest rates, quantitative easing, trillions in digital money created with a keystroke. Every round of stimulus weakens a currency, and every reaction from rivals is another act of retaliation. The invisible tug of war continues, one exchange rate at a time. But new players have entered the field. Sanctions, digital currencies, cryptographic power plays. The US dollar, once untouchable, has become both shield and sword, used to control trade, freeze assets, and punish enemies without firing a bullet. When Washington cuts a nation off from the dollar system, it's not diplomacy. It's warfare by another name. That's why Russia, China, and other members of the BRICS alliance are building alternatives, trade networks that bypass the dollar, new payment systems, even the possibility of a joint currency. Their message is clear. If the dollar can be used as a weapon, then it can be resisted as one. Meanwhile, the world's financial landscape is shifting again. Inflation has returned. Debt has exploded. And for the first time in decades, the supremacy of the dollar is being quietly questioned. Gold is back in demand. Central banks are hoarding it. Digital currencies, both state-controlled and decentralized, are challenging traditional money altogether. The rules that govern the 20th century no longer apply. And in this new era, wars will be fought not over oil or land, but over algorithms, reserves, and code. The front line is no longer physical, and it's digital, mathematical, and global. So ask yourself, can a nation lose a war it never fought? What happens when your savings, your retirement, your paycheck become pawns in a game between superpowers? And when inflation rises, who really wins, the worker, the banker, or the state that quietly devalues its own promises? The truth is, every central bank meeting, every policy shift, every quiet decision to print or to hold is part of a larger story. A global struggle for control over money itself. And just like those 5 men at the Plaza Hotel, today's financial architects know that the most powerful wars are the ones the public never sees, because the greatest battles aren't fought on front lines anymore. They're fought on spreadsheets. History never repeats perfectly, but in finance it often rhymes with alarming precision. Every empire, from Rome to Britain to the United States, has discovered the same secret. If you control the currency, you control the empire. And if you lose that control, the empire begins to fade. When Rome debased its silver coins to fund endless wars, its economy inflated and trust in its money collapsed. When Britain, at the height of its global power, abandoned gold after World War I, its currency weakened and its empire began to unravel. And when the US cut its final tie to gold in 1971, the world entered a new monetary order, one built entirely on faith in the dollar. But faith is fragile, and history suggests it never lasts forever. The first lesson is simple but haunting. Money is power, but it's also a promise. A promise that what you earn today will hold its value tomorrow. Every time that promise is broken, through inflation, devaluation, or manipulation, trust erodes. And when trust disappears, so does dominance. That is why nations fight to keep their currencies strong, and why they secretly weaken them when the economy slows, because a cheap currency fuels exports, boosts profits, and buys short-term growth. But it comes at a cost. Workers earn less, savings lose value, imports become expensive. The illusion of prosperity hides a slow, quiet theft, not from your wallet, but from your purchasing power. It's the same strategy every empire has used in decline. Rome diluted its coins, Britain inflated its money supply, America prints dollars by the trillion. Different centuries, same solution, same consequence. The second lesson is more subtle. Every currency war is also a class war. When governments devalue, the wealthy and we who own assets often grow richer because their stocks and properties rise in nominal terms. But the middle class, whose wealth lives in savings and wages, quietly loses ground. That's how inequality widens, not by accident, but by policy. Look closely at every major inflationary period in history, and you'll see the same pattern. The gap between those who print money and those who earn it grows wider. The winners are those who understand the game. The losers are those who believe their money is safe. Now, as we move deeper into the 21st century, the battlefield has shifted again. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are openly challenging the dollar's supremacy. They're building new trade systems, settling deals in local currencies, and exploring the creation of a shared digital reserve. It's not just about finance, it's about sovereignty. Because whoever controls the global reserve currency controls the rules of global trade, and the United States has held that position for nearly 80 years. But that dominance rests on one fragile foundation: confidence. If enough nations decide to bypass the dollar, its influence begins to wane. And once that process begins, it's nearly impossible to reverse. That's how empires fall. Not with a bang, but with a currency swap. Meanwhile, digital technology has opened a new front in this ancient war. Central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, are emerging as the next evolution of money. They promise efficiency, traceability, and control. But they also give governments the ability to monitor, restrict, and program money itself. Imagine a world where your income could expire, where spending could be limited by category, where financial privacy becomes a relic of the past. That's not science fiction. It's the logical endpoint of total monetary control. And then there's the counterforce: decentralized currencies like Bitcoin. Born from distrust in central banks after the 2008 crisis, they represent rebellion against manipulation, money without masters. But even these digital alternatives have become entangled in the very system they sought to escape. Governments regulate them, banks trade them, speculators distort them. The dream of financial freedom is still there, but the war for control continues, now in cyberspace. The third and final lesson is this. Currency wars never end, they just evolve. In one era it was gold and silver, in another paper and printing presses. Today it's code and central bank policy. The tools change, but the motive remains the same. Power. So when you hear news about inflation, interest rates, or exchange fluctuations, don't think of them as dry economics. They're moves in a global chess game, subtle, strategic, and often invisible. When one nation raises rates, another lowers them. When one prints, another hoards gold. Every action has a reaction. Every policy hides an agenda. And you, whether you realize it or not, are part of the battlefield. Your paycheck, your mortgage, your grocery bill, they're all shaped by these invisible decisions made thousands of miles away. Because in the end, currency wars don't just determine which nation prospers. They determine who can afford to live well and who quietly falls behind. The battlefield has no borders, only exchange rates, inflation charts, and policy meetings behind closed doors. And the soldiers? They wear suits, hold PhDs, and speak in acronyms that disguise the power they wield. Every empire believes its money will last forever. Every empire is wrong. Every empire fights for control of the same invisible throne. The world's money. Armies may march, borders may shift, leaders may rise and fall. But beneath it all, the true power lies with those who decide what money is worth and who gets to create it. Because whoever controls money controls history. Look closely and you'll see the same rhythm repeating through time. Rome's denarius, Britain's pound, America's dollar, each once unshakable, each eventually challenged. And always the transition came quietly, not through war, but through loss of trust. Today, we stand at another turning point. The dollar still rules, but rivals are circling. Inflation whispers where confidence once roared. Digital currencies blur the line between freedom and surveillance. And debt, that silent engine of modern power, grows beyond comprehension. Most people won't notice the shift until it's too late, because currency wars don't announce themselves. They unfold in the background through policy meetings, interest rate decisions, and coded language that hides seismic change. By the time the headlines catch up, the balance of power has already moved. That's why understanding money isn't just for economists, it's for anyone who wants to understand the world and their place in it, because when nations manipulate currencies, they manipulate lives. When governments inflate, citizens pay. And when the value of money changes, so does the value of everything else, work, wealth, and time itself. The great irony is that these wars, though invisible, shape every visible thing. Your job, your rent, your retirement, all of it flows from choices made by people you'll never meet in rooms you'll never enter. They don't need armies to conquer. They just need you to keep believing their money is real. So remember this, currency wars don't make headlines. They make history. And the next one might already be underway. If you've stayed with me this far, you now see what few ever do, that the story of money is the story of power, and that every financial crisis, every boom, every bust is just another chapter in a conflict that never ends. If you love uncovering the hidden history of money, power, and the forces that shape our world, subscribe to The Financial Historian, because the next economic battle won't be televised, but you will feel it in your wallet.